And good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the Loyalty Summit, Loyalty Leader Insights. My name is David Feldman. I'm chair of the Loyalty Summit, and we have a fantastic program for you today. I'm joined by three great guests who have given very generously of their time to join us from all the way from. You guys are in Toronto or Montreal?
Toronto.
There we go. All the way from here, Canada, to talk about the brand new Aeroplan program. And if you have been living under a rock the last few years, the Aeroplan program may have been in one or two news articles. And right now, I think November 8th is the magic day. The new program has been developed. It's been announced. It's going to launch. It's very exciting. And today what we want to do is we want to pick the brains of the Brains Trust that developed the program, and really dig into how they came up with the finished product from a loyalty development and loyalty management perspective. So let's get straight to the introductions. Mark Nasser, Scott O'Leary, Derek Whitworth from Air Canada. Mark, let's start with you. Welcome to the show.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having us on. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thanks to everyone for sharing your time with us. And I will just point out there's just a very, very small portion of the quote-unquote Brain Trust that developed the new program in the room here today. So we thought it'd be cool to introduce one another and find out what they really think about me. So I'll start out by introducing Derek. So Derek runs the product side of loyalty. He's, if you will, the chief operating officer of Aeroplan for all intents and purposes. Derek's been with Air Canada for 15 years. But also had some time with Star Alliance out in Frankfurt, and worked in the FI industry as well. So really great experience, and passionate about loyalty, as well as the travel business.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm going to introduce Scott. Scott leads our loyalty planning and partnerships. So looking at the kind of the long-term time horizon on Aeroplan, but also really importantly, all the partnerships that we're working on. So whether that's in the FI space, the retail space. I don't think I can do justice speaking about your career, Scott, but I will say Scott has done many things, and actually I admired him from afar for a long time when he was managing the Flyer Talk communications, because I was doing the same thing at Air Canada when he was doing it at Continental and United. So a great customer communicator with many years of airline experience, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. And now maybe to introduce Mark Nasser. He is effectively the Archbishop or Pope of Aeroplan. He runs loyalty and e-commerce for Air Canada. I've had the pleasure of knowing Mark for over 13 years, and we, going all the way back then, what brought us together was really the fact that we were both avid loyalty geeks, both avid travel geeks. And we shared that common interest and built that into a very, just a very positive professional relationship over the years. But clearly, Mark entered this, entered this chapter of his career. Prior to that, a lot of prior experience at airlines and in the hotel space, and entering this stage of his career with a real desire to transform loyalty.
Thanks, Bo.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for introducing yourselves. And again, thank you very much for your time, giving generously to come on today. And it's great the way you introduce yourselves, because I wanted to kind of note for our viewers who aren't perhaps familiar with you guys that, we've got a group of guests today that are incredibly passionate both about loyalty, but also actually understand it from the point of view of the frequent flyer as well. There's too many programs around the world, as all of my loyalty colleagues that are listening today know, way too many programs around the world that just don't have enough depth of actual customer experience, designing and managing programs. And, you can say sometimes that, well, some of the customers are just there to take advantage of the program, but airlines are no different from a retail store or any other vertical where marketing 101, you have to know, you have to understand your customer. And loyalty is very special, because with loyalty, it's an emotional connection with our customers, and we're trying to actively change behavior. So kind of with that, I want to set the stage. And for those that I mentioned earlier, if you're unfamiliar with some of the history of Aeroplan being a spun-off program, being the poster child kind of for program spin-offs, bit of controversy, newsworthy moments coming back under the hood of Aeroplan in-house. If you want to understand, or if you're not quite up to speed with all of that history, Mark was gracious enough to be on the program a couple of months ago, and we actually went to a lot of detail about the history of the program. So the replay is available on loyaltysummit.com. I'd encourage you to jump on there and have a look at that. And I want to say it's required reading, required viewing, but certainly very interesting discussion that we had with Mark. But I don't want to waste too much time today because we've got a lot of questions that have come in from people on the line. If you have more questions, please, there is a Q&A function in the chat. Guys, let's get straight into it. We talked about having frequent flyer experience, understanding the customers. How did you approach the development of the program with the aim of making it relevant to all sectors, all types of frequent and infrequent flyers, basically your entire membership base? How do you take a program that's existing like Aeroplan and make sure it's relevant to all of your members?
So maybe I'll start off. I think the very first thing is we didn't want to presume that anything that we were doing up to that point was the right answer, and so we really, we wanted to seize advantage of the fact that we had the opportunity to create a clean sheet redesign, and that's everything from the elements of the program down to the systems that are powering it behind the scenes. And so, needless to say, prior to actually, writing the first line of code around building this loyalty program, we actually did 18 months of homework, if you will, and that homework involved industry benchmarking. It involved sitting in living rooms of consumers across the country. It involved massive quant research, speaking to over 36,000 consumers at the end of the day. And all of this with a goal of creating meaningful relevance to what is a relatively broad design target, and taking a design approach that we affectionately refer to as a Swiss Army knife approach. And that, we want to make sure that we're delivering on that broad appeal. And the Swiss Army knife analogy is that 4-inch blade that's used by over 90% of Swiss Army users and nothing else. But we wanted to make sure that the program also delivered a degree of depth, or call it all the other doodads on the Swiss Army knife that are enjoyed by a minority of our population, or would be a proxy for our more engaged, most frequent users and engagers in the program. So we didn't want to, go too far in one direction without making sure that we were preserving the goodness that some of our expert users enjoyed.
I think one thing I'd add to that, echo everything Scott said, and we sat in people's living rooms together going through that, which was great.
Lots of cats.
Lots of cats. Lots of really interesting characters. It was a great experience. I think what I would also say though is, you mentioned what we went through with the Aeroplan, acquisition, and I think we very much held true to what we saw in the design and the research phase of the program. But because we brought Aeroplan back into this in the midst of the design and the development, we actually were able to take a lot of learnings of things that the Aeroplan program had been doing really well for the past 30 years. So I would call that out as well, that was a great asset for us. I think we had a really solid foundation to work from, but I think they just brought insights from how they've operated the program over the past couple of decades that we could bring to bear in creating an even better experience than what the Aeroplan membership was used to in the past.
There's definitely an amplification effect at the point of that merger. As opposed to I think one of the most validating moments for us is the fact that as we unveiled everything that we had done up to that point to that team, how excited they were and how energized they were, and how that design was largely preserved and amplified with the addition of that team.
Mark, when we spoke last time, and again, I don't want to rehash everything we talked about last time because we've got a great replay available for people, but one of the really important points that I think you mentioned when we chatted a couple of months ago was a lot of programs struggle with regard to getting executive sponsorship or company-wide adoption and support behind loyalty initiatives. And look, every vertical has this problem. This is not airline specific. The reality is competing priorities, and management's job is to balance, compromise, things like that. The problem with loyalty, though, is it's not quite an all or nothing approach, even though we like to advocate that it is when we're when we're pitching our ideas internally in organizations. But the reality is, though, is that we are reliant on operational teams to deliver benefits. We are reliant on other teams to help pull everything together. The loyalty team really is just behind the scenes design team, the operational teams and the frontline team. If the website is a bad experience, if benefits aren't being delivered on the front line, if the customer has a bad experience, when using the product, or if you're a retail store in the shop, it's a lot. All of those things can be loyalty killers. So getting that company-wide adoption, which doesn't happen without executive sponsorship, is a challenge for all programs. But you felt that you were in a very I don't want to say privileged, but perhaps fortunate position going through this development. Did you want to, perhaps now that the program is announced and everything, elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure, thanks. I think there were three main elements to it, and I'll go over them briefly. The first is, if you look at our C-suite, almost all of them have firsthand, in-depth experience with loyalty and even with the Aeroplan business. Our CEO was in charge of the restructuring in yesteryears, and obviously, was involved with separating out Aeroplan and thus understood the business very well. Our COO ran Aeroplan. Our CCO began her career as an Aeroplan call center agent, and I believe received the first ever call for an air redemption in the history of Aeroplan back in 1984. And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to leave anyone out, but these are people that could do my job better than I could do it, and they know the industry and the space and the program very well. So that's number one. Number two, you talk about the operational side and the product side. Our VP of product is a proud super elite member himself, actually, in his personal life. He came to Air Canada actually a number of years ago, about 20 years ago or so now, by virtue of the fact that he was a gate agent for Northwest Airlines in Vancouver, and while I was in college there, and was on Flyer Talk, and that's actually how one of our colleagues back then had found him. So that kind of gives you an idea for his familiarity and his passion in making it a great program and one that's sustainable. And then finally, the reality is that the vast majority of the loyalty experience is digital. Let's call it 90% or so of the touches that the loyalty program has with its members, that Aeroplan has with its members, are digital. And it's no mistake, it's no coincidence that e-commerce and loyalty are on the same team at this point in their evolution, because it really ensured that as we were looking at the customer from a data perspective, we could do so holistically. As we were thinking about the experience and bringing to life the new loyalty program, we thought about it in the context of the digital channels first and foremost, and that as we were building tools and capabilities, we were doing so equally, consistently, let's say from a back-end perspective. I won't try to geek out, but we built an entirely new back-end which serves loyalty in our retail e-commerce infrastructure. And it's common for our reservations agents, for our airport agents, and for our customers. So in terms of consistency of answers, ubiquity of functionality, and persistency of data, all those three things are elements in the rebuild.
Fantastic, and I know that a lot of our viewers right now, that are program managers, or advisors, and they're incredibly jealous of the position that you find yourselves in. Sometimes, we've all been there. We all understand how difficult it can be to explain the importance of why loyalty needs something to be a certain way, or why benefits need to be delivered consistently. Better to have less benefits and deliver them consistently than overpromise and underdeliver. And for some people, it's really hard concept to understand. I'm very blunt with people. I say, look, you're somebody who gets loyalty or you're somebody who doesn't. And that's okay. Just try to be honest with yourself if you're somebody that doesn't get it. And if you are somebody that does, advocate for it. When we think about that, and when we think about, and you made a point about being able to bring in all the experience and the learned experience of the I'm going to call it the old Aeroplan program now, as kind of weird as that is to say. But in developing the new one, you guys very deliberately decided to take a blue ocean approach and build from the ground up, even though you haven't blown the whole thing up and completely, started again. In the end product, there's a lot of similarities to the old product. But there's a lot of friction points that are removed. And then you've obviously laid in, a lot of new things. Despite having that positive executive sponsorship scenario and dynamic that you found yourselves in, what challenges did you have, or did you still face, internally in the organization, in terms of, hey, you know what, you're not going to get everything you want, even in that positive environment?
Maybe I'll say a word or two about that. And
sure.
Without getting in trouble.
No. So, well, two things. It is just, first on kind of the notion of the program, it is a complete 100% blow up from a tech perspective. Every single line of code, every system, everything from a tech perspective has been blown up for this. And we actually started launching the new tech last year. So it's not like suddenly in November, we're going to put a bunch of untested stuff. Say by the time we get to November, 70 to 80% of it will actually be in production and in the background, even if customers don't realize it. So hopefully it leads to a smooth and secure launch. That being said, kind of the push-pull, I guess, I don't know that I totally understand where you come from, but I don't know that I buy it because, yeah, we're loyalty geeks and we like to take mileage runs and stuff, but at the end of the day, we're also business people. And we have our budgets and we have our P&L targets. And, we want to run a successful business. I think maybe the difference is we're just convicted that a better program leads to growth. And so even if we sacrifice somewhat on unit profitability or breakage, ultimately we're going to have a bigger program. And when we look at both the top line and the bottom line, those numbers will be bigger than they were before. So internally, I would say that we stop, most of the crazy requests or things that are not sustainable because we get together every week as a leadership team, all 9 of us that run this division, and we thrash through ideas, and that's the majority of the funnel. And so by the time we get to the rest of the organization, in particular revenue management or finance, we've already done most of the trimming. We don't want to launch things that we don't think are going to work. We don't want to launch things that are just going to lose us a bunch of money or dilute. We want to launch things that we believe are going to be stimulative or grow Air Canada's appeal, principally with our domestic competitor and the proprietary bank products in Canada, because they are very, very strong in marketplace, the competitive banking products.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add on that this I did find somewhat unique to the approach that Air Canada is taking. Typically as loyalty programs sit in an organization, there's a push-pull, right? There's the idea of wanting to do things, and then, invariably it breaks something in another aspect of the organization, be it revenue management, finance, whatever the case might be. And as we zero-based this program and clean-sheeted it, we actually included our finance teams and our revenue management teams at ground zero, so as not to go too far in incubating a model, only to then take it to them to see if it worked. These folks, I can recall, what was it? How many days? It was weeks actually. That we.
You're talking about the RM?
Yes.
So we took a block of rooms at the Marriott at YUL, 16 days. The chief revenue officer at the time, who's now our operations chief, a number of our scientists, and from the revenue management team, a number of revenue management business leads, myself, Scott, and some other folks from our team, and we spent, I think it was 16 days straight in conference rooms. We actually had to find more data capacity. I think we had to get more cloud space or something. Yes. We were running so many models, I don't even know, until we could come up with fully thrashing through the redemption model.
That's right. We basically locked ourselves in the room and wouldn't let ourselves out until we were satisfied, until we solved the problem. Yeah. But what that did is that put us, it actually enabled us to take a broad Air Canada view and not just a Aeroplan specific view to everything that we work on. And doing that very early on has informed how we view the commercial contribution of the program.
And maybe one thing I'll just add to that too, because I think one thing I hear a lot about from my counterparts at other airlines is technology. Technology is a driver of everything that we do, as Mark had spoken about. We were in a unique position because we recently cut over our passenger service system a couple of months ago, and I would say that's a perfect example of where there were, there was a lot of coordination required within the enterprise to figure out how are we going to do loyalty, how are we going to get PSS implemented, but it was critical as an underpinning for us to deliver loyalty successfully. And maybe one other thing I'll call out is I often say that loyalty is one of those departments in an airline. If you're doing it right, you're talking to everyone, with maybe the exception of maintenance, although I think we're even changing that at this point.
No, we are for the handhelds.
Yeah, we are. And I would say a big piece of this is who are the people that you're bringing into the team and what is their approach with other people in the organization, because you need to create a lot of organizational buy-in. That's maybe not different from how other departments need to approach things, but I think for loyalty to be successful, just given the demands that sometimes they place in other areas of the business, especially on the operation and IT, you need to have people who are creative and problem solvers to deal with some of these issues.
That's Derek's nice way of saying make sure that I'm abstracted as much as possible from the interaction.
But this is really great golden nuggets, because and you guys, this isn't your first rodeo, but this really gets at the frustrations of loyalty program managers all over the world. And this approach, it really is gold standard. Now it's not always going to be successful, because if you don't have the executive sponsorship buy-in, you're still going to fail. If you don't have the counterparties that are creative problem solvers, it's going to fail. And if you don't have the same set of commercial imperatives that are driving everybody, you're going to end up with a different result. So, it's not quite paint by numbers, but loyalty is a complicated beast. It's not just as simple as you take some flights and you earn some points or miles and you get a freebie down the track. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And what people generally don't see is that it's 10 times that in terms of complication behind the scenes within the organization to get to a point of being able to deliver. And Mark, your point about blowing up the technology, I think a lot of people forget about the technology. It's either going to be restrictive and not allow you to deliver the program or the benefits that you want. It's going to stop you working efficiently with your other internal departments and divisions that you need to coordinate with, or it may open up opportunities that just didn't exist before. And I mean, it's funny. I mean, we talk about things like just making redemption easier, or expiration policies, or promotional ability. And I think a lot of members around the world in programs don't quite realize sometimes just how challenging some things that might seem basic are to actually deliver on. We've got a couple of questions that come in, and I want to not sidetrack too much. But one of the questions that came in, Narendra asked about. We're taking the spin-off and bringing it back in-house, in terms of affecting or contributing more to the Air Canada corporate valuation. I don't want to get into making market statements here, but from a slightly different point of view, obviously with it being an external entity, it's its own reporting mechanism, all the rest of it. With bringing it back in-house, are you able to comment at all on the public reporting structure? Will outsiders still be able to take a note and go, oh, look how Aeroplan is performing, or is it now all obfuscated behind the main airline results?
Yeah, so I can comment a little bit on that, and then maybe I'll comment on something you said about technology as well. In terms of the results, we're not breaking out the performance of Aeroplan publicly to the same extent that AMIA was obligated to do so when they owned the program. There is still some information that we're releasing, I believe gross billings we're putting out publicly, but there's less detail than before. That being said, we have spoken about this, right? And the last official market guidance we gave when we announced the strategy was, that it would create $2 to $2.5 billion of value for Air Canada. And that was when we did the go to loan announcement back in 2017. Of course, in 2018 and 2019, we commented to the market that we believe, we can accelerate, the path of the value creation. So we didn't put out a new target per se, but we did talk about timing and acceleration. We also, in our investor day early last year, talked about our growth plans for the program and why we think we could grow it. And we made a commitment to the market of growing the program by 40% within the first 3 years after the relaunch. And despite COVID, we still believe that we'll very much be able to hit those targets. So let's see how the next few months and so play out. But we do believe at this point we'll be able to hit that. In terms of what you said about technology, one thing I will comment, and we can decide if we go more deeply into this or not, as you recall. But I was giving an interview with Skift a couple weeks ago, and I made a remark, and it's a pretty big statement, and I'm deciding to double down and stand behind it. The number one reason, in my humble opinion, the number one reason why good ideas don't see the light of day in the airline industry is because of IT providers and technology. The number one reason, bar none. It's not finances, it's not operations, it's not commercial capability or willingness. It is IT. And this industry, unfortunately, is plagued with some particularly poor and flexible IT providers, in addition to also having some very good ones. We are truly blessed. I've never worked with IT partners as open-minded and as business savvy as the ones that we're blessed to work with right now at Air Canada. And so as I think of all the challenges that we faced over the course of the last 2 and 3 years trying to build this thing, we've accomplished things that at some points I sincerely didn't think we would be able to do because, we just have the right mix of support and vendors. And, even for example, my counterpart who runs IT, Catherine, she used to, run distribution and e-commerce and the call centers at WestJet. So she, has kind of just a keen business sense. She stood up WestJet Rewards when it was originally launched. So we got super lucky, IT is a barrier. It's, we're not in that the department, if you will, but the state of the IT providers and the state of the systems and their capabilities. And I imagine many of my colleagues are on the phone, face those challenges. And I want them to know, despite our rebuild, they're not alone. We face many of the same things, and we're still facing them. I'm sure we will right up until November 8th.
I think that's a very good and a fair call. I mean, I think people sometimes, it's very easy for us in the industry to get frustrated about what we can't do. And sometimes we just need to, keep your arms and legs inside the ride and just focus on what you can. And sometimes there's workarounds, sometimes they're not. When I opened, I made the comment that one of the things that you guys have really been concentrating on and that the team's been concentrating on is trying to make sure that the new program is relevant across the membership base. And with that, and I guess I don't want to kind of repeat everything that's on the Air Canada website, the Aeroplan website, but you introduce a lot of family-friendly features that I would certainly call next generation or best, picking the best of the best from what other programs have sort of played with out there in the world. And it's a unique opportunity. You're not the very, very first program design, so you're able to look around and go, that's a good idea. What can we do with that? You've introduced a lot of what I'm going to call family-friendly features. Can you maybe speak for a few minutes about how you've approached and developed the program to make sure that it's not just about rewarding just your top frequent flyers?
So maybe I'll start. First of all, you've hit on what was one of the number one insights that came out of that 18 months of research that I spoke about at the beginning. We all knew that enabling the family dynamic, as we call it, was important. Maybe we were surprised that it was the far and away the number one that came back. And I think we also knew that there wasn't going to be a magic bullet or a single aspect of the program that was going to deliver against that insight. And so instead, you see a theme that kind of persists across multiple design elements of the program. The most obvious is family sharing, but also the notion of shareable benefits, as it pertains to elite status, shareable benefits as it pertains to our co-brand cards, but also it informs how we're thinking about how we grow the program and how we grow our co-brand portfolio, knowing very well that the power of referral depends very heavily on that family dynamic. So it is a theme that we wanted to lean very hard into.
I'm actually going to just pick on Status Pass for a second, because it actually really dovetails very nicely with what Mark just mentioned. I would say, going back to the point about enabling the family dynamic, when we launched Altitude, which was our current branding for the Status program, like 7 or 8 years ago, we did extensive research on it, and enabling the family dynamic was a big thing that we saw then, but it certainly was a surprise, at least for me, to see how relevant that was above and beyond just the Status program, but for regular members as well. But I pick on Status Pass for a moment because that's a perfect example of a benefit. It's not rocket science. Like, you're giving benefits to a couple of people when they're traveling. You apply it on their reservation. Shouldn't be complicated to do. Perfect example of technology being a barrier. We looked at doing something similar in the past, and we couldn't get it done for a number of reasons. And candidly, I think one of the big ones was the separation of the technology between Air Canada and Aeroplan at that point. So, it's a perfect example of bringing everything back together is really enabling us to, I would say, amplify these capabilities and benefits for our members, especially when you're thinking about them not just as an individual, but as a family unit as well.
And I mean, Mark, we spoke last time, about Altitude, as when Aeroplan was a separate company, Altitude was a status program run in-house, it created a lot of friction points. So obviously the redesign of the program has allowed you to, check some quick boxes with removing a lot of those friction points. And it seems, from what Derek is explaining, you've taken that one step further and saying, we're not just removing the friction points. What are the things we've wanted to do that we haven't been able to do because either number one, the programs were separate, we haven't been in a position to do it, or the tech stack wasn't compatible or integrated in a way. And Mark, I know you have wider, CRM responsibilities as well, which I think, obviously dovetails into, again, solving that list of things that are, the pain points or the friction points. I want to take a very, very quick break to do the obligatory thanks to our sponsors before we go on, give you guys a quick chance to catch your breath. And I'd like to thank Engaged People, Amia, Adara, Hilton Honors, who are our sponsor and venue partner for Loyalty Summit in the Americas, Radisson Rewards, who are our sponsor and venue partner for Loyalty Summit in Europe as well. And I encourage everyone to keep an eye on loyaltysummit.com. We have some very exciting developments and news. Obviously, this year has been a moving target for everybody, but we're firming up our plans in the very, very near future. So keep an eye on loyaltysummit.com because we have some very, very, very exciting developments to announce in the near future. And hopefully you guys will be available to be part of that as well. As soon as we have everything to announce, we'll be letting everybody know when, where, how, all the rest of it. In keeping with the theme of being relevant to all members, and just as by way of background, certainly our viewers and industry colleagues in Canada, Australia, and Europe won't be any, and most of Asia won't be, this won't be a surprise to them. But for our US colleagues and listeners, sometimes it's a little hard to understand how, and I don't want to use the word, I don't like using the C word. Instead, I like using the term everyday earning and burning, coalition, Derek. the other C word. Righty,
moving right along.
Everyday earning and, sometimes everyday burning. And it's very, very different on the ground in a market like Canada than it is in a market like the US. And for US consumers and members of programs, it's very, very difficult conceptually for them to kind of understand that, which is, to be honest, I think it makes it very difficult for our colleagues at US airlines in a lot of ways as well, because even if they want to be progressive in, developing programs, it's really, really hard to make changes culturally amongst that membership base. But, I remember the last time I was in Canada being able to earn Aeroplan miles, at the LCBO, I presume they're still a partner. I have no idea. But given that dynamic, that you have this huge range of billings partners, it's not just credit cards, albeit credit cards are important, and you have some very, very fantastic partners from financial institutions. But when we think about that broader range and that broader ability to earn miles, one of the biggest criticisms that your airline colleagues south of the border have faced over the last few years as they've reinvented their programs has been I'm going to call it how it is, the devaluation of mileage earning from actually taking flights. Now the argument goes, but the top flyers earn more now than they did before. Of course, the problem is that the top flyers on the company expense account earning more than they did before probably find less utility in those additional miles than the people who actually were more motivated and earning at a slightly lower clip. If there's one criticism that observers have made of the new announced program, and that is that the new Aeroplan program it's not the most generous in the world when it comes to earning points from actual flights. Now, setting that scene up, and feel free to disagree with that, setting that scene up, my question to you is kind of twofold. Does the fact that you have such a broad everyday earn proposition negate that potential negative for people who are not the highest spending corporate customers, because there's still so many opportunities for them to engage besides the credit card that's not a big issue? Or, can it be controversial and even pose the question of, hey, is a little less generous airline earning the price you had to pay to get airline buy-in for everything else you needed to get across the line? I'm going to poke the stick and see where it goes.
You want me to start? You want to start?
There's so much there.
I think we all have things to say about that.
Maybe about the everyday retail partners, and that's, kind of your thoughts on that. I might talk a little bit about Aeroplan for a moment.
Sure.
Okay, so maybe just let me talk about Aeroplan. The first thing, and it just, oh gosh, it pisses me off, but clearly our communications, issue. Our new Aeroplan rates are in Canadian dollars. And so I've noticed a lot of folks have made like headline comparisons to, the three largest U.S. airlines and their Aeroplan rates, but they haven't necessarily controlled for currency. And so the reality is when you control for currency, the numbers are much, much, much closer together, given the value of the CAD versus the USD. So I'll get that off my chest. The other thing I'll say, and I'll let you in on some inside baseball. Maybe I shouldn't say it, but I'll say it. What you brought up in terms of folks that are business travel where corporates are paying versus leisure travel and all that. We considered that question very seriously. In fact, I was a big fan of having a lower multiplier for business class than for economy, because I'll be perfectly frank, I don't think anybody is choosing to buy a business class ticket across the Atlantic because they're getting a few more miles. I think people are buying a business class ticket because business class is better than economy. And they want the flat bed and all the accoutrements that come with it. And we had that debate internally, and actually credit to our chief commercial officer who kind of looked at me like I had two heads. It says, just the optics don't work. You can't do this, even though it's her budget that pays for those miles. So we ended up going with the same multiplier there. Air Canada invented branded fares back in 2006, a long time before I was here. And because of our branded fare structure, we already had multipliers that were quite low. So the actual reality is the everyday bread and butter leisure traveler within North America is going to get more miles from the revenue-based program than what they're getting today from our distance-based with the accrual percentages. Now, I think again, I don't know. I think it is, I'll say this, I think it might be dilutive to be giving as many miles as we are giving for business class travel in a revenue-based program, because it will be a good deal more miles than we're giving out today for most of those customers, but it is what it is, and it's customer friendly and it's a good optic. So there's nothing wrong with that then, I guess, at the end of the day. But leisure customers in our bread and butter economy North America markets will be getting more points. And it stands in stark contrast to our domestic competitor, who a year and a half ago, whenever they redid their accrual, they significantly reduced the accrual rates that they were giving to basic members or standard members on their revenue program. So actually, I feel very good about where we stack up competitively there. Sorry, that clearly touches a little bit of a nerve. My apologies, Sam.
Can I just add one thing on that topic, if that's okay? I think the other thing just to bear in mind that this was a big topic of conversation for us as well. It wasn't just looking at the earn proposition in isolation for flights. It was looking at earn and burn all together. And you will have noticed things that we've done like the preferred pricing for status members, like the priority reward vouchers that we're going to be delivering 50% off, any flight reward. So we wanted to make sure that we were looking at these things in context, because there's kind of miles out and then miles back in for redemption. So balancing that was a really important part of the dialogue. And just to really drive home Mark's point about domestic and North American flyers. Substantial numbers of flyers on our Aeroplan members flying today, they're earning something like 50 to 75 miles when they're flying, transcon flights on Air Canada.
It's almost insulting. Like, we're probably better not to give it than give it, and we didn't want to stop giving it. So
we wanted to make sure that the investment was landing, again, to Mark's point, with our bread and butter. So I think we're seeing a logical shift where it's really important to create that engagement with members where, frankly, there is a conversation about who are they choosing when they're picking an airline to take them where they want to go.
And I think that's a really, really good point, Scott. Sorry, just jump in there quickly because, in analysis I even did when American Airlines made their change a few years ago. I think I might be wrong here, but I think I used the term reward power. And it really was a case of taking, well, hang on, you got to look at the earning in combination with the redemption. Now, if you're slashing the earning opportunities for 75% of your membership base and you're drastically increasing redemption costs, it's a double whammy. It doesn't work out, and that's just going to result in less engagement. I mean, it's just like day comes after night. At least you hope it generally does. So it is that whole package. But Mark, I take your point. I remember taking a Trans-Pacific flight on United a few years ago, and I think when I looked at my statement earlier as a top status member, I earned like 136 miles for a Sydney-San Francisco flight or something like that. And it was you don't earn any miles for that flight than to say you earn 136 miles. It was in economy. It was a good deal. But I got to say my backside was a lot more than 136 miles worth of sore after that 14 hours. So, I think you're right in the sense that you have to think about these things, not just from what it looks like on the spreadsheet, but what's the practical impact on your certain member segments. If Susie or Joe are taking X flight from A to B, what did they earn before? What are they going to earn tomorrow? And is it a meaningful amount that if they're not a member, that they might consider joining up to earn those miles or points? Or if they are a member, that they're going to go, oh, this is great. I see my account balance increase. I'm encouraged to remain engaged with the program or to become more engaged with the program. I mean, ultimately, it's that behavior we're trying to shift. And if you're not getting that behavior trigger, then you've got to ask yourself, why are you doing it? Scott.
I'll lead into a direct answer to your question, but suffice to say, and any of my colleagues that are watching this that manage loyalty programs will know that when you go to a revenue-based accrual from a distance-based accrual, there's not a cost savings to be attributed to it. And in fact, in our case, it represented an incremental investment. The accrual method that it's replacing, I think the clinical term is it was a hot mess. It was just, I think we've already kind of beaten that horse.
It also produces a hot mess,
and it produces a hot mess. Again, as we looked at this accrual proposition and we saw the blind spots that you're referring to, there's just going to be certain customer segments that, even if they weren't earning a lot of points before, they might not be earning a bunch of points in the future either because they're buying discounted travel or whatnot. That's where, again, the combination of creating more meaningful redemption moments really comes into play. And Derek referred to preferred pricing, referred to priority rewards. I'd add into that mix family pooling. Look at your family of four who prior to this might have only had one, maybe the head of the household or one person in the household saw value in accruing points toward air rewards, but the rest of the family never traveled enough or engaged enough to have a meaningful consequence and therefore didn't engage in the program.
Yeah.
With family sharing, now that family of four, after one trip, even on the cheapest of fares, will cumulatively together have earned enough points for an award, potentially for an air award. And so that's quite meaningful and maybe another example of how, we really had to think of this in totality and making sure that, that this is in balance to the increased redemption opportunity that we're putting out there.
No, I think great points. Great, and I appreciate you guys accommodating the question. In Australia, I like to poke the blue ringed octopus, as we say. So you guys were good sports about that. But talking about, so you guys kind of segued into redemptions, and kind of the overall value prop for members here. Family pooling. I mean, I would encourage our viewers, if you haven't looked at how Air Canada's decided to go and implement family pooling, go and have a look. It's really interesting. It's really innovative. Some people are going to like it. Some people are going to love it. Some people are going to scratch their heads a little bit. But I think, Scott, you're right in the sense that it's a bold step forward, and it's likely to more probable than not that it's likely to result in more wider family engagement than less. Talking about the redemption value, though, and the value prop, because you made some other changes that are interesting. You might even say are bold moves. A big friction point with the old Aeroplan, carrier-imposed surcharges. Let's call them what they were: fuel taxes, fuel surcharges. They should have been abolished 10 years ago. And you're not the only carrier that's guilty of this. You're not guilty of it anymore. But the result is that some redemption's now going up in price. When we talk about redemption pricing, the other aspect is you've essentially brought in, any seat award pricing. So the old parlance, you still got your Saver or your Classic awards, inventory capacity controlled, and now you've got any seat awards, which generally speaking, you've provided guidance that will be within a certain range. However, you've also said extraordinary demand, all bets are off. First question, let's go in reverse order. Is it truly all bets are off, or have you got some caps in place so that we don't see what happened with Qantas when they introduced any seat awards, where you had these ridiculous 3 million mile redemption prices, which is just, in that situation, you're better to turn off redemptions than to be saying to somebody it's going to cost you 3 million miles. Thoughts on that and how you sort of approach that thinking in your development process?
Sure. So, would you like to?
Please. I can make comments, and I imagine you'll have some comments on top of that. One thing I'll just mention up front, Mark mentioned we have a big team of people working on this, and we have a very experienced team we call our currency management team, who look at this day in and day out. Anything you want to know about the Aeroplan program, they can pull for you in about 10 minutes. What I would say on that specifically is I think there absolutely are going to be cases where, there's high demand. It's gonna bump up the price above and beyond the price thresholds that we've identified. There are definitely controls in place so that it doesn't seem exorbitant or outrageous to members. That is definitely something that I think you can say that by virtue of having people who are experienced in loyalty and experienced redeemers, we've thought through that. That is not a good experience to put in front of the member. I think the one thing I also want to point out, though, is there's extreme highs, but there's also extreme lows. And I don't think that's necessarily come across in a lot of situations. There are going to be cases where the pricing may even drop below those thresholds, depending upon the prices that we have in market. And that's just by virtue of how we've designed the pricing model for flight rewards with our revenue management team. So, as much as there are highs, you book something last minute, you want, Vail the day before, spring break begins in the Northeast, or Northeast, I guess, out east in Canada, you're going to pay more. But I'd also say if you're looking kind of a random day in the middle of the year to, pop over and visit someone, in a province over, you may be seeing something extremely low. So there's a balance there for sure.
I think the critical thing to remember is today Aeroplan offers the fixed awards, but we also offer something called market fair flight rewards, which have no minimums, no maximums. YQ and YR surcharges apply, et cetera, et cetera. And in today's Aeroplan program, about 2/3 of miles that are redeemed for Air Rewards in Air Canada are redeemed for market fair rewards, not for fixed rewards. So in reality, if you look at the Aeroplan program of today, this moment, this second, it's actually a range today, but it's a broader range, and consumers, members don't have visibility into what that range is. And so we are more often than not failing the game of expectations, even when we're providing a very good value for those redemptions with some of the MFFR award, the market fair flight rewards, the MFFR awards. And so the new chart is really a combination of providing more value, but also, quite frankly, just the giant exercise in communications and expectation management. We want to be able to put out a position that says, the vast majority of the time, and by the way, we built the ranges around 80% or so of overall demand, including peak demand, including super peak demand, not just 80% of off peak or standard demand, if you will. So what we're really trying to do is we're really trying to say, let's come up with something that customers can understand, whereby the vast majority of the time we are meeting an expectation, and where we can really show how much better we are than the bank proprietary programs in Canada. Typically, our ranges end where their award chart begins, and all of those programs will charge you more. They have maximum fare amounts that are associated with their award charts, and they'll charge you more. Maybe the last thing I'll say is this is actually a place where our banking partners pushing us made a really big difference. As we were going through the negotiations, they had specific desires to see certain outcomes, particularly with some, Canadian domestic, transborder type awards. And when we're able to really work with them and understand what they're hearing from their front of line sales force and cardholders, we included that, we changed the program based on that, and then they ended up putting down economics that allow us to do it. Versus had we done it in isolation and we just told the bank, look, here's the program, take it or leave it, and let's argue to get as much yield as possible, which is the typical mode of negotiations, then we would not have arrived at kind of the Pareto optimal, outcome here. So I think we did. The banks saw value; they paid more for it. We saw value we could give, especially in the context of the banks and the economics, and so we gave it in terms of how we structured the program. And I think members are the ones ultimately that won from it.
Thanks, Mark. We're in our last few minutes here, so we're going to move to the final question here. Status earning and qualification. And obviously, the way any program wants to design their status earning is that, you want to make sure that, you're able to provide meaningful benefits to your status tiers, particularly to your top tiers, and at the same time, you also want to make sure that you want to find that sweet spot, that it's a meaningful amount of effort required to reach that qualification without it being so hard it's completely out of reach and people deem it irrelevant, so therefore they don't stretch. Otherwise, you don't get that behavioral lift to get there. But you also need to design those thresholds with commercial objectives in mind. And there's multiple ways you can do that. Ultimately, what that comes down to is you don't want to give away your best top benefits to somebody mileage running on the cheap without them doing, they might be able to, you can reach it if you buy the cheapest flights, but you're going to have to buy a lot of the cheapest flights to get there, or you have fewer flights, but you're buying more expensive flights. There has to be a revenue link in the back end. I mean, that's just the way it needs to work. But there's different ways you can approach it. There's what I call the US model. And then there's other methods that other airlines around the world have, status credits, tier credits, things like that. I know you guys spent a lot of time at the beginning of this process looking at not just the insights from your members, the existing program, but also everything that's out there in the world. Can I ask why you didn't take the opportunity to move to a status credit or tier credit style system, given the disadvantage of an overt dollar qualification being punitive in a deflationary fare environment?
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, if I can add one thing on the tier credits. So I've spent a lot of time talking, just by virtue of being in Star Alliance, we chit chat with our fellow, partner managers or program managers. Actually, I spent a lot of time talking with Air New Zealand about their status credit product or a qualification metric. And one thing that's problematic, I think, for me when I look at that is you're talking about revenue. Tier credits are not necessarily a great way to create a proxy for revenue. You have to deal with partner flights. You have to deal with, creating those proxies even within your own program. And I think to Mark's point, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like we heard from members, we spoke to them. They're used to our structure. There have been challenges with it over the course of time as we've rolled out changes, but it's something that they're used to. And frankly, we didn't feel like we needed to tamper with it too much. So personally, that was one decision I feel like we didn't even have to spend too much time on, just because there was a level of consumer acceptance and value that they found in how we've structured it to date.
I'll chime in. Our members actually asked us not to change it. Our members in general, our status members were nervous about changes that we would make to the status program, and really didn't want us to mess too much with that construct. Quite frankly, also mentioned This structure lends itself to a lot of the other features that we've added on, for example, to our premium co-brand card, where we've added in elements like rollover status credits, rollover e-upgrades. It also has lent itself nicely to our everyday status qualification that we've introduced into the program.
Terrific. No, thank you, guys. That's great answers, and I appreciate you sharing your insights into that thought process that went into that. We are at time, and you guys have been very generous with your time. I don't want to go over. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been terrific. I think we could easily keep going all day long, and you guys would be able to continue to give great insights. Thank you so much for joining us. There will be a replay next day or two, guys. We'll have it up on loyaltysummit.com. The replay, if you've missed it. If you haven't watched the previous discussion we had with Mark a couple of months ago, please do watch it. Mark really gives some fantastic insights into the history of the program and the development. And it's, I think it's great background if you want to sort of understand how we led to where we are today. Guys, well done on the program. I'm getting a lot of messages and texts coming in from people viewing that are just saying, fantastic job on redeveloping the program. The reality is you're never, ever going to be able to please everybody, but it's about trying to get the best that you can within the constraints that we sort of talked about and delved into today. So well done on a great job. Thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll be able to have you back at Loyalty Summit in the future when we announce our new exciting plans coming up. Thanks once again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Merci bien.
Bye now.